You're listening to an exclusive podcast of Goldhawk Fights Back for You on AM 740 Zoomer Radio. Goldhawk Fights Back for You airs Monday to Friday, 11 to 1 on AM 740 Zoomer Radio.
Now, let's continue with Goldhawk Fights Back with Dale Goldhawk on AM 740.
Well, as promised in our second hour, Wanda Morris is here. She's Executive Director of Dying with Dignity, joining me in the studio. Wanda, very nice to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
An awful lot of discussion going on, what with the federal appeal of the BC court ruling, a number of different long media stories clear across the country. A lot of people, it seems to me, are more and more talking about the issues surrounding assisted suicide. Are you seeing that as well with your organization? You're getting more queries, you're getting more traffic from people wanting to get information from you?
We are. In fact, since the story of Nagy Morkos was launched, many people have called our client support program to find out about information. Our membership numbers are up 35% from last year. We're now over 2,000 members across the country, and I think more and more people are just interested in getting educated and learning more.
Tell me a bit about the Morkos story.
Nagy Morkos was a man with the Huntington gene. He had nursed his father through the last years of his disease, so he knew what was in store. Yeah. Huntington is a really horrific disease that attacks the motor skills of the body, rendering the person unable to control their limbs. They end up spending months in bed, essentially strapped to the bed at end of life. He knew that wasn't the way that he wanted to die. And yet his life was full and rich. He wasn't ready to go now. Yeah. But he was in a bind because if he didn't take steps soon, he would be in a situation where either he couldn't avoid the horrific death he didn't want, or he'd have to ask.
So what did he try to do?
So he decided to end his own life, and with the support of Dying with Dignity and our client support program, we were able to give him the information and the emotional support so he could have a peaceful death. Because it's actually very hard to have a peaceful death. People often think, well, when my time comes, I'll get in the car and turn on the gas, or I'll take some sleeping pills. The reality is they're much more likely to end up in hospital with brain damage or organ failure than having the peaceful death.
You call it a gentle death, as opposed to all the other ways that one could choose to die at one's own hand.
Yes, so often we hear the horrific stories of somebody who gets a cancer diagnosis or something, and they end up using a really violent means to end their life, perhaps taking a gun and shooting themselves in the head, or jumping in front of a train. And it's traumatic for them. Of course, what a horrific way to die. And then the repercussions to the family and the innocent bystanders just go on for years and years.
And what if you try one of those violent ways of ending your life and you're not successful as well? You simply suffer grievous injury, for example.
Yes, and often what will happen is someone will then end up in hospital still wanting to end their life but unable to do so themselves, so then literally sentenced to just wait. And often people with some of these diseases have healthy hearts, so they can go on living for months or years even though they really truly want to die.
I can't believe that people would choose that kind of a violent way to end their life unless they were absolutely forced into it, and because in fact there's no real legal, gentle way to do it in Canada.
Well, and our client support program does provide information about gentle and peaceful ways to do it. But what we really want to do is make ourselves obsolete so that people facing a grievous illness and suffering unbearably have the option of going to their trusted physician and talking about all their options, finding out about pain control and palliative care. And then if this last resort is truly what they want to do, then getting a peaceful way to go. And of course, what we know is that for many, many, many people, what they are afraid of is different than what they can live through. So if people know that they have this option at end of life, most of them will invariably end up living with great palliative care till the very end and dying naturally.
Getting a few more years out of their lives, right?
Yes, and that was such a tragedy with Nagy Morkos in that he could have had years with his family, his beloved wife, if he hadn't gone so soon. But there was no way he was going to let Jan help him to die and face 14 years in prison.
And yet we have the criminal code, section 241, that says it's illegal to aid, abet, or counsel somebody to suicide, which would include the doctor, would include anyone, wouldn't it? I mean, it's absolutely categorical. You must not do this or you will be breaking the law.
And that's a good law for us to have in most cases. We just want an exception for people that are grievously ill, suffering unbearably, for people that have a stomach cancer, for example, or an ALS diagnosis, or something where their end will be either painful or they will suffer unbearably. We want them to have an option.
And doctors, I guess, if they ever consider doing this kind of thing quietly, illegally, that a lot of doctors would think of the case of Dr. Nancy Morrison from Halifax, who was charged with first-degree murder, 1997, after she injected a dying patient to end his life. Now, the charges were eventually dismissed, but they weren't dismissed. They weren't dismissed on the principle of assisted suicide. They were dismissed because there wasn't sufficient evidence to prove that it caused the death of the 65-year-old patient.
You are so right. And we put our doctors in a horrific bind because we ask them to look after us, to cure us if that's possible, and if not that, to support us, and most of all, not to abandon us. Yeah. And yet, in some cases, it's more harmful for an individual to continue living than to be allowed to die. We have all kinds of anecdotal evidence that doctors today are assisting people to die. They're doing it with individuals they have a long-term relationship with. Yeah. What we need to do is get this out of the closet and regulate it so that we can make sure it only happens where people are really consenting, and the people who truly believe that they are suffering so greatly that they'd be better off dying. They should be allowed to do so. Let's
get everybody involved in this conversation. 416-360-0740 or 866-740-4740. Or you can send your thoughts directly to me at fightback@goldhawk.com. Where in the world is this kind of assisted suicide surrounding the circumstances of a terminal illness or great physical suffering? Where is it legal?
Let me answer that. And first, let me just comment about our language. Yeah. Because we're using the terminology about suicide, but that's not what we're advocating. Suicide is what happens.
You're not advocating the suicide.
No. Suicide is what happens when someone has a life expectancy in front of them. We're only talking about people who have a horrific diagnosis. They are going to die. Yeah. They're just asking for the option to have a peaceful, a gentle death. So where this is legal, we have 5 jurisdictions that have specifically passed legislation. Yeah. The 2 with the longest history, we've got Oregon since 1997 and the Netherlands since 2002. So between those 2 alone, we have 25 years of evidence to look at to say, how is this working? We also have Washington State, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Switzerland, in fact, has never had a prohibition against this. So it's been legal there and recognized for many decades.
Now, there was a time years ago, even in Canada, where assisted suicide, in fact, was not illegal, was put into the criminal code. Is that not a fact?
No.
Back in the mid-'70s?
In the 1970s, what happened was that suicide itself was deemed no longer illegal. But the prohibition against assisting a suicide has always been there.
All right.
And,
okay.
Yes.
All right. Here's a notion of how the Washington State Act works, and I got this wording out of Moses Neimer's column because he was writing about it in Zoomer magazine. Here's what it says. It's a good, clear description of what we're talking about. A patient must be diagnosed as having less than 6 months to live, be of sound mind, make a request orally and in writing, have it approved by 2 doctors, then wait 15 days and make the request again. Then a doctor may prescribe a lethal dose but may not administer it. Is that well written and well constituted as far as you're concerned at Dying with Dignity?
That's a really clear provision with great safeguards. At Dying with Dignity, we actually advocate for something a bit broader than that, because in our conscience we've got Sue Rodriguez and we've got Gloria Taylor, two folks that had ALS. They had more than 6 months to live, yet their suffering was grievous. Also, by the time they wanted to end their lives, if we think again of Nagy Marcos as well, they couldn't physically have taken a pill. So what we believe is that the terminally ill people absolutely should have the right to a pill, but also for those who are grievously ill and suffering unbearably, they should have the right to an injection, a shot, if they can't self-administer a pill.
If they can't do it themselves. But if they have access to a shot, is that not more than assisted suicide? Is that not euthanasia? I mean, if we're to use a strict
yes, we call that
definition?
voluntary euthanasia, so we support that as well.
Yeah, all right.
Goldhawk Fights Back for You airs Monday to Friday, 11 to 1 on AM 740 Zoomer Radio.
Wanda Morris is here. She's executive director of Dying with Dignity. Let's go to the phones and get some thoughts on assisted suicide. Mary is on the line from Toronto. Mary, what would you like to say?
I'd like to just make a comment about the need for some kind of regulation. My dad was 94 in palliative care, close to the end, coming in and out of consciousness. We asked the nurse for pain medication, and she said she would only give it to him if she deemed that he was in pain.
If she deemed he was in pain.
I decided to report her, which I did, and a few days later we had another nurse, and my dad was in pain. At that point, they were only giving him pain medication according to 1 hour, 2 hour. It wasn't continuing.